I always look at it as I'm in their playground. A lot of arrangers want to put like their own personal stamp on things, but I felt like I do have the Chris Opperman show. It's a real show that I can put on anytime I want. I don't have the need to like assert myself that way, So I'm actually like kind of minimally invasive. I try to present a bigger version of what's already there. Because I want to present, the thing I definitely don't want to do, I definitely don't want to classify it where like now because it's classical music, I have to add counterpoint or add, these kind of traditional forms to it or insert that conceit on it. I don't want to do that. But I try to make the object as true to what the composer was thinking as possible, but make it larger or make it fit the chamber music ensemble or, you know what I mean? Like fit the paradigm that it's in, but in a kind of authentic way.
This is Music Maker with Tyler Kline, a podcast from Loose Leaf Transmissions. Welcome, y'all, to another edition of the podcast. It is so great to have you along, and if you are new here, it's so great to see you, great to meet you. I know I can't really see you, but just to let you know what you're getting yourself into today. My name is Tyler, and I am a composer, a radio broadcaster, curator, producer. That list just goes on, and it keeps growing, it feels like. But mostly, I would simply characterize myself as a maker. I really just enjoy making things, whether that's music or art of some kind, or even more practical things, like I built my home studio, for example. But anyway, on this podcast, I sit down with other creative people to discuss their journey, process, philosophies, basically whatever it is that makes them who they are and inspires them to make the art that they make. So again, if you are new here, glad to have you along. Thanks for tuning in. And if you've been listening for a bit, I really appreciate it. It is so good to have you here again. On today's episode of Music Maker, I'm joined by Chris Opperman. Dr. Chris Opperman wields a special array of expertise. He is a composer of wildly original music, a top orchestrator and arranger, a dedicated and visionary educator, and a trusted advisor for an incredible cross-section of the music industry. Chris holds a PhD in music composition and has taught undergraduate and graduate level courses on music theory and composition, popular and classical music history, music technology, and the music industry. Chris is quite an interesting guy, and the work that he does is just as interesting as he is. He's basically got one foot in the commercial music industry and one foot in the contemporary concert world and academia. And in this conversation, we talk about all of that, plus the influence of Frank Zappa on his music and really his life. Zappa is actually an undercurrent that runs throughout this entire chat. We also discuss the variety of musics that Chris makes and why that's important to his creative ethos, and how he's been able to forge his own unique path throughout his career. Chris was so much fun to talk to. It's an amazing conversation, and I can't wait for you to hear it. Just a touch of business to share, as we always do, before we jump into this conversation. One of the simplest and indeed the best way for you to support this podcast is to do what you're doing now. Listen to this episode, listen to earlier episodes, tell your friends who might enjoy listening to this to listen themselves, and then give us a follow on your favorite streaming platform. That will ensure that you get the newest episode of the podcast as soon as it's released and pushed straight to your device. I actually get notifications on my own phone for my own podcast. It's really kind of weird and cool. Also, an equally impactful way to help the Music Maker podcast, and also free, is to leave a rating and a review if you feel inclined. We've gotten a couple so far, and it's been so great to read your thoughts, and I'd love to share those here on the podcast. So if you feel strongly about Music Maker, if you value these conversations in really any way, please do get in touch. You can leave a review on Apple Podcasts, or now on Spotify, you can leave comments on individual episodes, and I suppose also get some chat room style conversation going over on Spotify. So anyway, ratings, reviews, comments, the more of those that we have, the more visibility the podcast has, and the more that we are able to grow and expand and just get more people aware of what we're all about. So if you do that, I really appreciate it. And now on to my conversation with Chris Opperman. Well, Chris, I'm so excited to sit down with you today. I feel like I've known you for a very long time, and we've talked with one another online quite a bit. But this is really our first time like getting to sit down and talk, and it's going to be a big time. So thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I think your radio show is awesome. I love listening to it. And I think all the things you do for the community are great. And it's an honor to be here with you today. Thank you.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. So, where we like to begin here on Music Maker is as far back as you're willing to share or as far back as you can remember. And that is, what is your earliest artistic memory as a composer, as a sound maker?
When I first started taking piano lessons when I was 8, I wrote this song. And, by today's standards, it's not really a song. It was like some low notes, just descending chromatically on the piano and like a kind of
Mm,
rhythm. And I just kind of went from there. So I was always interested in the way notes combine to make music. My piano teacher said I would edit all my exercises. If I didn't like the
yeah.
endings, I would change them
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So it's just always been like a part of my essence, I guess.
Yeah. Just kind of taking what exists, maybe, or just like not being satisfied with what you've got, right?
Yeah, I mean, it can always be better. I'm still like that today. I still like look at scores. I go, I can change that. I'm gonna change that, and it's usually not like note rhythm changes, but more like kind of like hairpins, dynamics. They shift into one another, just kind of more detail.
So, when would you say is the first time that you actually consciously kind of put notes onto a page, like formed a full original composition?
When I was 15, I was in a play called Bye Bye Birdie, and I started writing pieces. They needed sheet music for the scenery, like on the piano.
Mm,
So I wrote a piece to be the background on the piano, and then I just kept going from there. I always kind of wanted to write music. I decided I wanted to be a composer. I went on a trip to Canada with the Mustang Marching Band in Clifton and got a copy of Frank Zappa's Civilization Phase 3 album.
mm.
And it was literally like I heard the first song. I went, that's what I want to do with my life. And it was that simple. That was the it.
So I was hoping you'd bring up Frank Zappa because he's one of my musical heroes, and it's right there on your website. This what you just said. I mean, what was it about Zappa's music? I mean, we could probably talk the whole time about this alone, which we won't. Don't worry, everybody. But what was it about Zappa's music that kind of hooked you in and made you want to be a composer?
It was just it kind of opened up the possibilities of music to me. Like a lot of the music I was listening to at the time, obviously, is like the pop, rock, rap, hip hop kind of music of my generation.
Yeah.
And and then I started hearing that, and it was just so different and so creative and colorful and powerful, and you know what I mean. It just hooked me. Just the sound of it hooked me.
Yeah, I my first encounter with his music might have been in middle school. A friend of mine was a drummer at the time. He's a primarily a piano player now, and I'd go over to his garage and we just turn the stereo on and play along. And I think I would switch between electric bass and keyboard. And he introduced me to Zappa's music. I think the first song I heard was Muffin Man or something, which is like just a really really silly, just straight ahead rock song. And then from there, the rabbit hole of like, oh, there's jazz, there's classical music, there's like, he would cast songs with his band and then like rearrange them for orchestra. And I think being able to listen through the just the breadth of his output, yeah, it was like a big eye opener for me at a very young age, actually. When would you say your first encounter with a composer in real life was?
I mean, it's tough because the new music world defines composer, I think, differently. Well, definitely differently than the music industry does.
Sure, yeah.
And I do think differently than I would. So the first one was probably Mike Keneally, who played guitar in Frank Zappa's band in 1988. And he'd written some piano pieces and a few albums. And I started online communication with him when I was a teenager. I emailed him out of the blue. And then we kind of struck up a friendship. And his music was so different than Frank's. And that was what was interesting to me. the way that it sounded, and I could talk to him about, like, how it was built as I went through all his songs. He has this album called Boil That Dust Bag, and together we went through every single song, and I was like, "How did this part work? How did you think of this idea?" And we kinda, like, dissected the whole thing. It really helped me think about music, but he would also give me impossible homework assignments. So, I
Mm.
think if he was kinda like, "I don't feel like talking to this teenager now," I think he'd give me an assignment to get me to go away for a little while. I'm not sure about that, but it's possible.
Yeah.
But, like, I was like, "The Black Page #1," I was like, "Well, the Keyboard Magazine says it's impossible." He'd write back, "No, it's not impossible, get to work." And so I would sit there with a metronome for days trying to get that nested tuplet. For those who don't know, there's, like, a tuplet with tuplets inside it, and, for a 17-year-old, that was a lot.
Right, yeah. I think I was in grad school before I encountered rhythms like that or, like,
Yeah.
consciously thought about it.
I spent I probably spent a whole weekend just trying to get this one bar right. But we all had the advantage. With the thing about Frank's music was when these pieces were being written, the band members couldn't hear them. There was no MIDI. There was no, you know what I mean? So you just had to, like, now we can hear an example of what it's supposed to sound like and then try and emulate that example. But back then I think what the musicians accomplished is really extraordinary.
Yeah, for sure. I'm interested in what you said about the definition of composer, because that might help kind of color all of our conversation today.
Right.
Because obviously, I've people I've talked to have defined it like capital C composer. Like you sit down with your manuscript paper and you write for some orchestral instruments or something like that. And of course, that's a very narrow definition of composer. So to you, like, can you talk about what you see as the difference between, maybe a classically trained composer and then like what a composer would be in the music industry, as you mentioned, and kind of where you fit in to that? Maybe it's all over.
Sure, that's fair. Yeah. So, in the music industry, a composer is anyone who creates music, even the lyrics, right? If you're a lyricist, you're also a composer, which isn't the way it is in the other countries. So, other countries are really specific about the difference between lyricists and composers. But here, if you write lyrics, you're also a composer by default, regardless of the method. But I would say that Taylor Swift is a composer in my definition of it, in the sense it's I sometimes have this feeling, and this might offend a lot of people, and I apologize in advance, but I get this feeling that somewhere in the mid to late 20th century, it got walled off where academia created their own alternate history of music and let those who be composers and excluded everybody else, probably the detriment of everybody, right? Because, like, I think that there's enough room in the world for everyone to express themselves musically with whatever abilities are ingredients that they have, and that I'm not going to judge someone else's expression to be not composerly or composerly. Like, even when I was a composition professor, I wouldn't do that.
Right.
Like, my music business students all were required to write a piece and record it and release it, and I gave no criteria at all on the art. The grade was for getting the job done, not for the quality of the art. But obviously, if students asked me for help, I would help them. But I think that it's created this. I don't know how to describe it, but I'm in it because I exist in both worlds. Right, I'm a member of the music industry, and I'm also a member of this new music community. And sometimes I feel very confused when people are being really, like, exclusive about it.
Yeah.
Am I explaining myself well here?
Yeah, no, it makes total sense, and I would agree with you
Like,
100%.
when I taught music history, I taught 20th century music history twice. And the second time, I remember really being struck by, like, questions, not by the students, but myself. Like, why do I never talk about John Williams? Why do I never bring up video game music? Like, where are all the women? Would also be a great question. And feeling like I wanted to rebel against the narrative. I never got a third chance to teach that class, but when I did teach a 21st century graduate theory course, I was able to bring in all kinds of music. We did Hamilton, we did Anna Klein. I mean, Anna Klein obviously is a new music composer, a very talented one. But
Yeah.
I was able to create my own kind of world of 21st century music that I felt included everything, or was inclusive enough so you could extrapolate that I am including everything.
Right, and to your point about, movie and video game music, I mean, that's, living composers are making that music, and that's probably most of the contemporary music that our society is consuming at large. What like new music, classical new music, concert music world is a pretty niche space, I think.
Right. And I'm old enough that my professors, I love them. I'm not putting them down, but they had this conceit about like, well, I knew this guy was a film composer, but he also was pretty good, outside of film music and that kind of thing. And I was kind of like, you
Yeah.
know, get a little side eye.
Yeah. So you mentioned, your encounter with Zappa's music for the first time and knowing like, okay, this is what I want to do. Is that also the moment that you knew you wanted to pursue composition and this craft as a career, or is there kind of a separate defining moment where it's like, this is what I want to do for a living, for example?
Well, that's an interesting question. And I think sometimes, there's free will, there's destiny. But I think that as much free will as you have, it really matters who is around you and what they're saying to you.
Yeah, right.
And I feel like if I had grown up listening to the Velvet Underground, I'd probably be really different than I am today.
Mm,
But instead, I'm listening to Frank Zappa and reading books about Charles Ives. And I'm in this kind of, moderate Republican town that has those kind of mores and values. And talking about like you have to have a job. And music composition obviously is not a career in which you're going to make money. So I had Frank telling me through his books, like, get a job, and Charles Ives being like, don't let your children starve in your dissonances. And my band director being like, I think you should major in music business. And Berkeley being like, hell yeah, major in music business.
yeah.
And I think that I was well served to have an undergraduate degree with that kind of return on the investment. Like it helped me so much throughout life that I was able to have like a natural career in the industry, to fund things, to learn how to market things. Like the things that I learned there, I still use and apply today. So I feel good about that trajectory.
And that kind of stuff isn't typically a part of like an academic curriculum for like art music, for example. Like if I'm a music major in college, there might be like a music business class that I can take. But just speaking with a lot of different people who have gone on to even get doctorates in music composition, I mean that there's a blind spot where a lot of people make it all the way through without knowing these business practices that you're kind of talking about.
It was a cause of a lot of fights when I was a professor because I would constantly argue that we were preparing students for jobs, and then I would get feedback like, it's not our responsibility to train them to be in the workplace. And, I understand the conceit of that, I understand why, but it also felt like they would graduate and then go work at Starbucks. And I'm not putting down people who work at Starbucks. I'm just saying that, like, it would have been helpful if they had had like resume training, interview training,
Right.
how can I apply my skills instead of being told like you're either doing, new music composition or you're not a real composer. That's not a great message for young composers. So I do feel strongly about business skills for musicians. That's something I do feel really strongly about because I'm the beneficiary of them, you know? Like, I wouldn't be in business if I didn't have those chops.
Right. Exactly. So you went into college majoring in music business.
Right.
Can you kind of share a bit of an overview or and connect the dots, so to speak, of your creative journey starting at that time and until now? I know as briefly as you can. I mean, do you feel like you followed a more conventional path, or were there any unexpected twists?
I definitely don't think I followed it. I mean, no, I don't think anyone would say I followed a conventional path, just the start of it, starting as a music business major. But it was a punchline with my friends because I had like a 15-piece band with original music and I had my record label and we go to parties, they would be like, Chris is this great composer and blah blah blah. But guess what his major is? Haha, music business.
Mm,
But I didn't want to major in composition then because I did want to be employable. So anyway, I graduated from Berkeley. I got my degree in music business management and entrepreneurship. I had my company started. But the sales figures, my first album, weren't enough to support my life. I mean, it did well in the sense that I used to get $15 a CD. They would cost like $4 to manufacture and a few bucks for shipping. So it was a lot easier to at least recoup your recording expenses and stuff like that. But I started off at a Universal Music Publishing Group, and I worked in the basement because they don't let you start on the ground floor. So I started in the basement. My job was typing in titles into a computer and then typing in how much money the song made, and then going on to the next song. I did this for years. I was only based for a little while, but for a long time. And what I did there was so valuable was the first most important thing was like, a lot of people think that people in the music industry are like blood sucking vultures who are just looking for, short term money. But what I found was like a group of music lovers who like really loved the music, and they're older than me, so their generation's music was like Elton John and Yes and Peter Gabriel. And so they just kept feeding me albums. So I would sit there and I listen to album after album after album. I probably listened to like 5,000 albums while I was there, and absorbing all of it, you know, and getting all that information. And it turned me on to so many different kinds of music. And while that was going on, I would gig every night because I had 20-year-old energy. You know what I mean? So I would work from, well, typically I would work from, let's say, like 8 to 5 or 6 at my job. And then I would go home, eat, and then go out and play piano for whoever wanted me, whoever would take me, you know? So I'd play like open mic nights, I'd play for anybody. And then I started getting better gigs, like paying gigs. I worked in a cabaret. The cabaret band was the funniest 'cause I worked with these vocalists who I loved them dearly. They were not good vocalists, and they would skip around and stuff. So it
Yeah.
was really like interesting to suddenly be like, okay, we're gonna learn to do right now. Or
Right.
like we're gonna modulate right now, you know? And then eventually I got Steve Vai's attention. So I was still in communication with Mike Keneally, and we did my second album called Cleaver Stuka, which is a solo piano album. And Steve Vai really took notice of that. So then I did an orchestra project with Mike with the Metropole Orchestra in Holland, and we did an album called The Universal Provide, which I just love that album. I had so much fun doing that. And then from that, Steve Vai hired me to do the same thing for him. So I left Universal because I was too busy with I left Universal actually because I didn't like the trumpets in this one song. The vice president was fine with everything, but the guy right above me, he didn't like that I was taking all this unpaid time off. And he was like, "You can't do that again." And I was like, "Well, these trumpets are awful," so I quit. I couldn't. I had to have good trumpets. When you're 20, in your 20s, you those are And so I went off with Steve Vai for a while, and then I came back and I worked with El Shankar and Zakir Hussain and Ginger on. They had a little tour, so I played keys in that tour, and then I went back to work at a business management firm, and there I had like a lot more access to celebrities. Like I worked directly for them, so that was really interesting too. And sometimes people say like I'm really down to earth, and it's mostly because like if you know Katy Perry personally, or like like Snoop Dogg, like all these people, like you understand like how small time you are compared to that. So I'm never imagining that like I'm a big shot, you know. So then about 2008, at that point I was in LA for 8 years, and I played on 2 Grammy nominated songs, and I had this band and we're doing pretty good, but no one would sign me because I'm fat and I don't sing, and that was like kind of a deal breaker for the music industry in terms of getting signed. And I didn't really feel I felt like I was just treading water. I didn't know what to do. So I decided I was going to go get a master's degree in music composition and move back to New Jersey to be with my friends. And so I went to Montclair State and got my master's degree in 2010. And then in 2011 I started teaching. And then I went to Rutgers starting in 2013 and got my doctorate while I was still working remotely for GSO. So I left LA, but I still worked for the company.
Yeah.
So I worked remotely for 8 years. And then when the PhD exams came around, it was too much to work and do that also. So I had to leave. And then I started my own company. So I started a business manager consulting firm. So like my firm doesn't do taxes, doesn't have an insurance department, like those kind of things. But there are a lot of producers who need help, but they don't need to spend 5% of their total income for services they don't need. So they can call me and get custom services for a fair price. So that company is going really well. And then I started doing the arrangements with AWR about 2019. There was a project called Undertale Live, and that was the first one I did with them. And then I work for them, I do a lot of projects with them now. It's like all the touring stuff I do now is through them.
Yeah. So when you were working in the music industry in LA, for example, you were gigging in the evenings. Were you writing a lot of original music at that time?
Constantly, hundreds of I mean,
Constantly.
so much more than that's available.
Yeah. Wow. I'm interested in hearing the story behind your record label because you mentioned that Purple Cow Records. What prompted you to launch this, and why not at that time just hop on an existing label? Why start your own?
Well, the first one is kind of a mean answer to myself, but the truth was that there was all I couldn't be in Frank Zappa's band because Frank had died, and so many of his band members got into the band when they were 19, and I was like, "If I don't do something of my life before I'm 20 years old, then I'm gonna be a loser forever," and, I mean, it's not a great internal monologue, I know, but, I had it in my head, it was like a bee, you know what I mean? Like, "I gotta do it, I gotta make it right now." So there was no record label who wanted to sign somebody who was only writing predominantly instrumental music. So I decided when I was younger I wanted to make the world's first internet mini mall. So I made this mini mall called the Mad Fat PHAT Internet Mini Mall, and then I sold movie posters from it. So my dad had a client who had a lot of extra movie posters, so we put them all up for sale, and then I used that to raise the money to fund my record label. So then we made the first album, Oppie Music Volume 1, and, the song Ain't Got No Beef got some radio play, which was fun, like, local radio play, not like big time.
Yeah.
But what's interesting was I got emails that every time someone goes to a fast food restaurant and doesn't get what they ordered, they email me about it. It's, like, really funny, like, 25 years later, you get an email, like, "I went to Wendy's, they had no beef, it was crazy." You know?
It's awesome.
But, when you make songs or you make music, you don't know what happens that goes out there, they kinda, like, have their own lives, and
Yeah. So the record label, is it only for your music, or do you publish other musicians' music through your record label? Tell me a little bit about how that operates.
I mean, traditionally, it's only been my own music. There were a couple people where I was interested in what they were doing, but either they couldn't really replicate it or it just didn't, work right. But if I saw a project that I was interested in, I would buy it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. How has that changed? How has Purple Cow Records changed over the years?
Well, it was largely defunct when I was in a PhD program because most of it was. I mean, it's harder and harder for young musicians, I think, because my bands in LA, what I would do is I would perform the show and then sell merch,
Right.
and the merch was CDs. And I would take the money from CD sales and pay the band that money. But now I can't play a show where I sell CDs, so I don't know how I pay the band. That's kind of rough. But I mean, people do complain about how the music industry has shifted toward a single basis, or they're trying to get singles, or the cheap production stuff. But we've also, as a society, created infrastructure financially where that is like really the only option. Like, if I only get $1,000 for a million streams, there really is like a limit to how much I can spend on a track and reasonably
Yeah.
expect to make money back. Oh, I only finished. So the label came back. We did the Kickstarter, so I'm having this conversation with Kurt Morgan, who is in Dweezil Zappa's band. I know we didn't talk about this, but I toured with Project Object, and I've gotten to perform with members of Original Mothers of Invention. I think I performed at least one person from all of Frank Zappa's bands except the Hot Rats band. We're only missing one, and I've gotten so much encouragement from that fan base and from those musicians that I grew up worshiping, and that's really close to my heart. So I was talking to Kurt Morgan, and I was thinking about at that time I was thinking about applying for tenure track positions, but I felt like it would be weird to go to an interview and be like, "Here's my last album from 2010," and
Mm.
have no professionally recorded material since then. It would feel like a big hole. And it also felt like it would be financially impossible to hire musicians and, you know, the rock musicians, the things I got out of the rock musicians in LA were like amazing. Like, I really could push them, but I couldn't push classical musicians in the same way without them getting upset with me, like, and like really upset with me, like this is impossible. You can't ask this of me. and that kind of friction is like not fun to be a part of. And also it made me feel like resentful towards them because I'd be like, what do you mean you just have to practice? You know? So to save everybody's sanity, we decided we would make, well, the first plan was to use Note Performer and make Note Performer recordings of everything. And then Kurt got more ambitious and we got these high-end samples and we really did it. Like Kurt did such a great job on that album, Chambers from Hell I'm talking about. He did such a great job. But when we were talking about it, it was like, okay, we're gonna put all this energy in and then we're gonna upload it to Spotify and we're gonna make back like $23 and it's gonna be a terrible investment. So that was when I decided to try doing the Kickstarter.
Yeah.
And I feel like that really it did kickstart the label back. It brought it back to life. And I mean, just my heart, and, you know, it's like we put the album out in 2020 in the midst of the pandemic, and we barely finished it in time for my wife to give birth to my son Dale. And then just to like fill, I mean, we filled an entire mail truck full of orders. It was crazy because we did get a lot of orders after the Kickstarter, and you know, it was just like wow, like I left the marketplace for that long, and I came back, and I felt like the album was supported by the marketplace, you know, and that like made me very happy inside. And then the second Kickstarter had your piece on it, the Still Waters Kickstarter, also did well. It didn't sell as well after the fact, but I think part of that was at that time I was working a lot for AWR and doing all those projects. So it was hard to dedicate the time to promotion that I should have. I apologize. You know, I just feel really fortunate. Like I know that I'm not like one of those new music darlings like you know, those Ivy League people. I love them. I'm not putting them down and
Yeah.
I'm not like a famous rock musician or a jazz musician. I'm not like in any category where I'm dominating this category or I'm important in any way, really. But just the fact that I could sell thousands of albums anyway,
Yeah.
you know, like that makes me really happy inside.
Yeah, I love that you bring up Kickstarter because I've had some successes on Kickstarter as well. You know, my Orchard album primarily, which I felt like I set reasonable expectations when I launched that. I asked for exactly what I needed, you know, because of course Kickstarter is all or nothing. And it just like blew my mind that all these people came out to support that because I feel like institutions have really let me down. Like I've applied for grants and just I don't get grants and you know that kind of stuff. And it's like this infrastructure exists now where it's like somewhere in between that kind of grant fundraising support system kind of thing, but it's not quite like just shilling selling out of your trunk kind of situation. it's
Right.
it's a, it's a nice middle ground where it's like you know you get to make a promise to somebody as long as it's you know as long as they fulfill the funding. And I it's the same way. I've the most Orchard albums I've quote unquote sold was through the Kickstarter. And, you know, there's been some stragglers since then. That was a couple of years ago now, but I hope I'm able to continue to inspire people to, you know, support me through those kinds of avenues because it's such a beautiful thing, I think.
Yeah, and let you directly support the artist, you know? And it was, you know, going to the post office every single day during the pandemic, like, just felt great.
Oh yeah.
You know, first of all, it was supposed to my house I could go 'cause I had a newborn, so I was, like, really careful, you know? But there was one in Clifton where I could go and not talk or touch anybody or anything if I went early enough, and, you know, when I would go to the post office, it's like, you know, that's the kind of experience that, you know, I don't wanna sound like the old man yelling at the cloud, but that experience of getting the order, packaging the thing, going to the post office, writing their name on the envelope, sending it out, like, it's so nice. I wish everyone could experience that, you know?
Yeah, and it's a lot more obviously a lot more intimate and personal than like looking at how many streams you got and not knowing who is listening at all.
Yeah.
Right.
Are there random the algorithm is so random. Like, my top playing songs on Spotify, I'm like, I would never pick, like, almost any of these songs,
Right.
you know? Like, the songs they worked the hardest on, like, hardly anything.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild. This is the future we're living in.
Yeah.
So lately, I feel like every time I see you post on social media, not every time, but practically every time, you are just busy working as an orchestrator and arranger for some major national or international tour. You mentioned the Undertale live earlier. And so I was wondering if you can talk about this facet of your work as an orchestrator and arranger. How did you get into it? And why do you keep coming back to it? I mean, I believe in our correspondence, you said you were just doing some traveling for this reason, right?
Right. Well, in 2001, I played Final Fantasy VIII, and I'd played a little bit of Final Fantasy VII before that. And I played the original Final Fantasy with my cousins back in the early '90s, but that was the first one where I noticed how good the music was. Like I put in the opening movie, and I heard the Lithos piece, and I was like, "Why is the music in this game so good? And who wrote this piece?" So I googled it up and found out it was a gentleman named Nobuo Uematsu from Japan, and it just kind of stuck with me. And then after that, I was too busy for all to play any video games. But then when I came back from the Steve Vai tour, I had free time again, so I picked up. I was playing ROMs, I guess, on my computer. So I had Final Fantasy 6, 5, 4, and I just decided I wanted to play all of them. So I was like, okay, it's my hobby. I will play all the Final Fantasy games. They would take me months to play because obviously I was still gigging and stuff like that. So I couldn't really play that much. It took a very long time. But I started getting the soundtracks and listening to them. So I'm in the music industry, and at the time, no one in the music industry was talking about like video game orchestra concerts. Really, Steve was working on Halo, I think, at the time. So he looked at me like he understood that I was onto something. Does it make sense? Like,
Yeah.
but most people like didn't know what I was on about it at all. And I would daydream on meeting Nobuo Uematsu. I was like, it would be so cool to meet him. He's so awesome. In terms of melody writing, it's one of the best ever to do it. you know. And then in 2011, they did a performance at BAM. It was the first New York performance at Distant Worlds. And I had the special tickets, the VIP tickets that I could meet the composer and meet Arnie. And one of the guys in my band went to college with Arnie's son, Eric, and he was playing mandolin in my band. He's like, so tell Arnie, that I said hi. And so I went and I told Arnie, and he was happy to meet me. And Nobuo was there, and I showed Nobuo his name in my CD, and I was like, I love your music, and said, well, honored to meet you. But I give CDs out all the time. I'm not expecting anything. And then out of the blue, like almost a year later, I got an email from Nobuo, and the email just said, "I love your music, especially concepts of nonlinear time." And the only thing I remember I was so grouchy that day. Some kind of like work, blah blah blah, and I was like real grouchy about it. And I got this email, and I was like, "Wow, my day is like just so much better now."
Yeah, right.
And it was the start of just like I always tell my friends, like when I met Nobuo Uematsu in 2011, I didn't know it, but I just been hit by lightning, you know. And it started this relationship where I just kept not believing what was happening. Like Eric emailed me, and I started a correspondence with him. And then I was like, "Oh, that's cool, like, they wanna be friends," and then they had their Carnegie Hall show, and I had free tickets, and I sat next to Nobuo, we talked about it, and this is Carnegie Hall premiere, and I'm like, "I can't believe I'm at Carnegie Hall sitting next to Nobuo Uematsu, who is
Right.
my friend," and you know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah,
it
yeah,
just
yeah.
sounds like a fictional story. And then at the after party was really where I should have, like, thought I was being scouted or something. It should have occurred to me. But I'm hanging out with the creator of Final Fantasy, and Arnie's there, and Eric's there, and Nobuo's there, and it's awesome. And you know, and then like a year later, I got an email about working for the Mannheim Steamroller through Arnie and Eric. And then so I did that job. But even then I was like, I'm never gonna work on Distant Worlds. Like that's their flagship production.
Yeah.
Like it's so cool I get to work for them at all. And then we did Undertale Live. And then during the pandemic, I started working on the Final Fantasy VII Remake Orchestra World Tour. And even then, I was like, this is a one shot deal. Like, they just need more people because of the pandemic. And then next thing I know, I'm in Japan. and while the country's closed, like the
Right.
Japanese consulate gave me a special talent visa so I could go to Japan and help with their 30th anniversary concerts.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting, right outside of Square Enix with Koji Fox, who's the lead singer of the Final Fantasy 14 band, The Primals, and writes a lot of lyrics for the songs. And I'm having the same conversation. I'm like, I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe I'm here. And he's like, well, believe it. You're here. You're a part of the story. And I'm just in dumbfounded disbelief. I was only a fan of like one video game, and that was the one I get to like do stuff with. I'm just very lucky. I'm very lucky.
How much of your work now as a composer is this?
I mean, it's very close to 100% now, in the sense that the time I'm able to spend working on music is spent working on these tours. But it's just such it's the best way to. I mean, first of all, I love it and it's a lot of fun and it pays really well. So those are all really good things,
Right.
you know.
Right.
But just that I can be a small part of something that brings so much joy to so many people. Like you go to the concert and you don't go to you go to a lot of orchestra concerts, you understand. It's not normal to go to an orchestra concert and have like 5,000 people between the ages of 18 and 25 in full costume screaming like it's a rock concert, you know? And it's awesome, right? And I don't know why musicians wouldn't want to be part of that, you know?
Yeah. I mean, this I can imagine this is something that you never even imagined was an option when you were kind of plotting out, how am I gonna make a living as a musician, right?
I mean, not even close. Even when I was at the show, I remember looking at the credits thing, I'm like, "How do you get a gig like that?" You know?
Yeah. That's what I'm
Like,
wondering. Like, how
yeah.
can I do this?
You know? I think part of it was I was in early enough that I stood out, but now there's, like, tons of musicians doing this stuff, you know what I mean? Like, serious
Yeah.
musicians who are into it.
So, can you kind of walk us through, like, obviously, you don't have to give away any secret ingredients, but, like, how does working as an orchestrator and arranger differ? Like, how does your process differ from when you sit down to write, like, original music?
It is so much faster because I don't have to write the music, you know? Like, we did the Beach Boys Christmas tour. It was the only full orchestra tour they did in their 60-year history, and I was one of the primary arrangers for that, and just, I always look at it as I'm in their playground. A lot of arrangers wanna put, like, their own personal stamp on things,
Yeah.
but I felt like I do have the Chris Opperman show. It's a real show that I can put on anytime I want. I don't have the need to, like, assert myself that way, you know? So I'm actually, like, kinda minimally invasive, you know what I mean? Like, I try to present a bigger version of what's already there. So I don't really tend to add things. Like I'll add like some stuff sometimes, but very thoughtful and very conservative. You know what I mean? Because I want to present. Well, the thing I definitely don't want to do, I definitely don't want to classify it where like now because it's classical music, I have to add counterpoint or add
Yeah.
these kind of traditional forms to it or insert that conceit on it. I don't want to do that, but I try to make the object as true to what the composer was thinking as possible, but make it larger or make it fit the chamber music ensemble or you know what I mean? Like fit the paradigm that it's in, but in a kind of authentic way.
Yeah. This might be putting you on the spot a little bit, but do you have a favorite piece or song or arrangement that you have made through these productions?
There's a few that I really love a lot. There's one in Undertale Live called Another Medium that I was really proud of that one. I mean, sometimes the source material is very close to what I do anyway, so then that always feels very inspiring. There's another song there called "The Choice." The Fifth House was the ensemble that did that recording, and they do a lot. They're defunct now, but they did a lot of like kind of mindful exercises and stuff like that. So when it came to The Choice, I had space there where I could create this kind of module for them. So it was very non-traditional in the sense that I had ingredients, but they weren't timed. And it was about like the conductor, Eric Roth conducted and produced the recording, and them kind of reacting to the materials. And you have to put a lot of trust in the musicians there. They wouldn't work for every ensemble, but for that ensemble, I felt like I could do this and get away with it. Valsi Fantastica is on the nominating ballot for the Grammys this year, but I just love that piece. That was the first one I got to do for a New World, the chamber music ensemble version of Distant Worlds. And I just like it's exciting for me to be a fan of a composer and then get to work on their music in an official capacity,
Yeah.
with their blessing and permission and approval, you know.
Oh, of course. Yeah, that's so cool. Is this like for the ones with video games, is there gameplay in the back? Like, is this a really kind of holistic experience for audience goers?
Oh yeah, you see the gameplay footage. and they're timed. The cues are timed to the footage, and it's a full experience. I have to actually try to not watch the screen because for me, I find I start to lose. I start to get into the visuals when I'm really trying to hear the music, you know. But it's beautiful. It's just amazing. I would love to go back in time and show it to some composers, but like check out what the future's like, you know.
Right. Yeah.
But the chamber music ensemble is a concert experience. There's no visuals for the chamber music ensemble, so it depends. Undertale Live was interesting because I mean I wish it had done better, but and it wasn't our fault that it didn't do well. You know, it was the pandemic I think killed that project basically. But you could go on your phone and get an app, and then you could vote whether to spare or kill the different monsters, and it would change what pieces got played and the story of the visuals
Wow.
depending on
Yeah.
what people chose. And I made I was like, no one's gonna kill any monsters at this show. Like if you're a fan of Undertale and you love music this much, you're gonna go to the Undertale concert. I'm like, there's no majority in which they vote to kill any of the
Yeah.
monsters.
Right.
But we had we had this stuff prepared anyway.
It's an interesting issue to run into.
I mean, I was like, I mean, we could have totally bluffed, you know?
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah. Tyler here, interrupting this conversation just briefly to let you know that you can easily help power the Music Maker podcast and Loose Leaf Transmissions Network in a big time way by becoming a Patreon subscriber. By becoming a Patreon subscriber, you're supporting these fantastic conversations with makers in a real way. And one of the perks to being a subscriber is getting early access to episodes each week. And I've also launched a Patreon exclusive feature called The Workshop. It's sort of like an audio journal where I share a little bit about my own creative process as it pertains to some current composition projects that I'm working on. Anyway, yes, that little bit of support on the Patreon, in fact, does go a long way in helping me cover the cost of some tools that I use to produce this podcast. So I hope you'll consider becoming a subscriber by following the Patreon link in the show description of this episode, or you can log on to looseleaftransmissions.com/support. I really appreciate you getting back to me. And back to today's episode. So, shifting gears a little bit
Yeah.
to one of my questions that I ask everybody, and this is always one of those things that I think we kind of touch on indirectly, but so I'll ask you more directly now. But what would you describe as the primary pillars of your creative practice? Whether that's philosophy or aesthetics, stuff like that.
I mean, I think open-mindedness is probably the best thing I've got going for me, is that, you know, thanks to Frank in a lot of ways, I grew up without that classical music bias. You know, like I was interested and I learned the chops and you know what I mean? Like all those things were there. But the bias of being a classical musician, like I didn't have that. I still don't have it because it didn't work out. But I think I've had a happier life for it,
Yeah.
you know. The second one is, you know, I do think things should be funny. And, you know, I think a lot of people think music isn't funny, but sometimes it's very funny, you know, and I want my music to have like a full, I mean, you know, I mean, I've written so much music. I mean, probably like 800 pieces, something like that. And most of them like don't come out or they're not like good enough or, you know, whatever. But I find almost like an actor where I try to keep pushing against the boundaries of what I'm doing. Like I want to expand every direction, right? So, you know, if it rocks, can it rock harder? Can it rock way less harder? Can I do something really, really slow? For a while, I was writing a lot of slow music where I wanted everything to be just, you know, take your time. I mean, we talked about that because that was when you were working on Orchard. That's what I was into. And just trying to dig deeper, see what I can pull out of myself, you know?
Yeah.
And then the discipline part, the working part, it's not, you know, I do believe that people should work at a pace that they're comfortable with, but I am comfortable working myself very, very hard and not, you know, being stubborn and not giving up when things get difficult. So I guess those are kind of the pillars, but they're not didactic pillars. You know what I mean? I would never tell someone like, write 12-tone music, or, you're too passe, or don't write
Right.
12-tone music because that's too passe. It wouldn't occur to me to do that.
I was going to bring up the role of humor in your music because that's something that's always kind of stuck with me. And you mentioned your album Chamber Music from Hell, which is it's just that alone is kind of funny. So, um, and of course, listening to some of your music, and I mean that quality is in Frank Zappa's music too. Like, there's a decent bit of humor. I mean, there's a lot of humor in his music, and a lot of satire in his music. So you even say on your site that your compositions often benefit from your sense of humor. So can you discuss what this means more specifically? I mean,
Well, and endears me to audiences, and this is an audience that's really unpopular to talk about, but you do want people to come to your concerts, and I am not handsome, and I am not in shape, and I'm not like ostentatious or pretentious. Really, I mean, I'm a composer, so I have some pretension. You know what I mean?
yeah,
But like, what's the audience getting out of coming to this concert? Like, they're gonna get this like guy who plays these pieces that are sometimes beautiful and sometimes funny, but they also get this kind of like HBO stand up TV host guy personality, like telling them how the music works. And like, I got a lot of criticism about that in my academic career, but I also got people to come to these concerts and have fun. And that was important to me. Like, the audience should be a part of what's happening. Like, I remember when I did the cribbage variations, I got a lot of flack about running a 12-tone piece, and a lot of flack about, it being passe or whatever. But I was like, you're not the audience for this. Like, the audience for this is the Frank Zappa fans who are interested in Perez and Webern and want to experience that kind of music in a way they can relate to and understand. And what I wanted to do there was like, part of the piece was written so that you could analyze it in a really kind of straightforward way. Because a lot of Babbitt analysis is about trying to find the rows and calculating the rows and stuff. And I thought, what if it was just totally obvious what the row was? If I made
yeah,
no attempt to obfuscate or hide it anywhere in the piece for all 15 movements,
yeah,
what would that be like for an experience? And what I found was that I felt like people analyzed it, they would very quickly talk about other things besides the row, right? Because it was, it was there. And it actually was inspired by an email I got from Scott Tunis, who played bass with Frank Zappa in the 80s, throughout the 80s. And he emailed me. I was talking about Dupree's Paradise, and he said something. I'm going to kind of paraphrase. It was something about like how he had tried to commission a sequel to this Webern piece that he liked, Concerto for Nine Instruments, and from Bruce Fowler, but he was too busy playing cribbage with Mike Keneally on the bus to do any work.
yeah,
And I thought, like, I'll do this piece. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Because I thought it'd be funny to take the rules of cribbage and then combine them with 12-tone music. But it wound up like being kind of deep, because even though it's a joke, there's a lot of the 12-15 parallel, like having 15 note phrases with 12 pitches and all that. It wound up like really inspiring me to try things. And it also, I felt like I was getting a PhD in music composition, that, in music history, a lot of times professors were often dismissive of some of these techniques, like Cajun techniques, or, 12-tone music in general, or that kind of stuff. But I felt like if I did them, I would have the knowledge of someone who actually did them.
yeah,
And I'd
right,
be more useful to my students, because I can confidently say, like, when you do this thing, this is what the experience is like. So there's another piece on Cheerleaders from Hell called Composition 5, where I rolled dice to generate all the pitches and rhythms. And it sounds like on paper that I totally gave up the composition process altogether, right? It sounds like I just randomly threw some notes on the page. But what I quickly found out was each movement has its own different operation. The way I did it was different, but you have full control over the outcome. All it's doing is getting me out of my head, right? So instead of obsessing, like, do I want G sharp here? I'm like, okay, I have G sharp. But all the other things that make you composer, the way you form phrases, the octaves you choose, the rhythms, you kind of choose, like the way the counterpoint works, the timbre, the melody, all these things are still in operation, even if you decide a third party magical process is going to determine your notes and rhythms for you, you know?
Right. Do you listen much to Mark Applebaum's music?
I heard some of it, but not like in depth.
He's he has a lot of amazing music, but he has one piece that's like a spoken word piece, I guess, called Pre-composition, and it's just him talking, and it's like what you say in your brain as you're conceptualizing a piece of music, and it's the most funny and also serious thing I've ever heard.
Oh man, I can't wait to hear it. I can't wait.
But what you're talking about kind of reminds me of that, like finding the humor in the process and poking fun at it, but also like fully taking advantage of the process. I mean, it's good stuff.
Yeah. And I also feel like it's important, you know, a lot of composers. I mean, I say these things that I haven't experienced them in the ways that like Annika Sokolovsky's experienced them or other people experience them,
Yeah.
you know. But like, man, like why are so many of them such jerks, you know? And just demystifying the process. Like I don't think I'm a special super wizard in my tower because I can read a book and then emulate what's in the book. You know what I mean? And I think it's poisoned for young composers to be inundated with these kind of like, oh well, you know, you're never gonna make it because of it. You know, it's just like not helpful. So I really try to make my materials as helpful as possible to students. You know, I just want everyone to have fun doing music. And if you want to write music, I don't want you to walk in feeling like you're too overwhelmed because you can't comprehend what's going on. Like you can with practice, of course you can. You know, like when I would teach music theory, there was always the cross. No, what is the word? The secondary dominance. Like a lot of students get freaked out just by the phrase secondary dominant. You know,
Yeah.
so I just go up on the board. I'm like, okay, I'm going to tell you this word, and you're gonna cringe, and I'm going to tell you in 15 seconds what it is, and you're going to be fine. I'm like, I'm borrowing a 5 chord from another key. That's it. You know what I mean? It's not magic. It's not science. Like I'll play on the piano for you. The three, the 5 of 3 is pretty nice. 5 of 7 pretty nice. You know what I mean? But don't freak out. It's just words.
How have students, and for that matter, like people who listen to your music, how do they respond to this sort of attitude that you're describing?
When I taught graduate music theory, I'm from New Jersey, and I have a deep pool of friendships here from marching band. So sometimes I would get band members in my class and who are teachers. And I remember one in particular who was like, he was like just the plain the counterpoint. Like I explained counterpoint, and he's just like it made so much sense immediately. You know, in a way like no one could ever reach me. Like it just I was like, wow, it just clicked. But I think it's the posturing is part of it. You know, if I'm going to posture it like you're going to get this, I know you're going to get it. You know, then you probably will. I did a video for Make Weird Music when I did the cribbage variations, and that got a lot of positive responses about the whole 12-tone process. You know, if I can inspire someone else to do something other than stare at their phone all day, then I've really done a good job. You know, like I want everyone writing music. I want everyone feeling comfortable writing music. I want everyone to explore it. And what's kind of cool is I think being a composer is so much more popular now than it was in the 1990s, like because of video games. You know, there's so many more people doing it, and I just think it's great. You know, like why wouldn't I want like if you love music and you love music composition and you love all these things, like why wouldn't you want to share that with everybody?
Yeah, I've said on this podcast before, I mean, video game music is what piqued my interest in and really all music. I mean, that's what got me set on this path is, playing Nintendo 64 as a kid and now here I am. So I totally hear you.
What are your favorite video game soundtracks?
Oh, I haven't played video games as much lately, but I mean, certainly like all the Legend of Zelda soundtracks. I mean, especially like Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, like those N64. I mean, even like the Super Nintendo, Link to the Past. So yeah, I'm out of the game, no pun intended. And yeah, I think that those are the biggest ones for me. I mean, any of the RPG kind of soundtracks, the fantasy worlds, and it's always those big orchestral kind of scores always interested me, I think. Yeah.
So cool.
So you've created music across a wide very wide variety of genres and styles. We talked about rock music, jazz. You have straight up classical compositions and beyond. I mean, blending and all that kind of stuff. So, why is this variety of musics important to your creative practice?
I studied composition with Dean Drummond when I was a grad student, and he actually told me the answer. And he was like, there are some artists who have a style and they're happy with that and they kind of grow within that style. But he said he thought I would just always keep changing. That I would be interested in different things and find different things to talk about, and that I wouldn't be satisfied, like for instance, writing jazz rock music for the rest of my career. I think that's kind of true. Like Miles Davis said famously that he wakes up in the morning and finds something creative to do with his life. I mean, he could have made so much more money if he had just played like kind of blue the rest of his life
Yeah.
and not done these like avant-garde ensembles of the 70s and early 80s. But he just followed his bliss. He was like, this is the music I want to make, and I'm going to make this music today. And tomorrow I'll decide to make this kind of music instead. Frank was kind of the same way. Like his styles were evolving. And I guess that was the examples that I had. Like Carla Bley, too. I mean, Carla Bley stylistically, I don't want to say she changed that much, but the ensembles changed and the people changed and the kinds of music she was making changed. So I just felt like that was the example I was getting from my inspirations.
I don't know if this is the right kind of question to ask, but what kind of function does it serve in your creative practice to be able to, wear this hat one day and maybe take it off and wear the next one? I mean, how has that served you over the course of your career?
Well, one of my biggest secrets is my ability to single task. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like my friends are like, I don't know how you do all this stuff. Like you have a business company and you do orchestrations and you're a professor and you know what I mean? But the truth is, like, right now I'm here with you. I am fully here with you. Right. I'm not thinking about anything else, and that's just what it is. So I'm just dealing with this in front of me. So if I'm looking at an ensemble and I have bass, guitar, saxophone, drums, and piano, I'm going to write a piece for that ensemble that fits with them, and all these things kind of
Yeah.
go in. But it's more like tools in the box than it is like a concentrated thought.
And that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately as I do so many different kinds of things myself, and just figuring out how to hyper focus, because once you do start trying to multitask, it's like game over. It's just like
Yeah.
your focus leaves. You can't get anything done at that point. So that
Oh, my
makes total
other
sense.
secret is anything that takes 6 minutes or less to do, I do immediately. My other secret.
Mm, yeah.
Because there's nothing worse than you're sitting there, your inbox is like 85 emails you have to answer in it, and you know what I mean? Like, you're not getting anything done if it's like that. So it's gotta be like in and out, in, out, in, out. Just, you know, keep that ball rolling.
What is a piece of music or a song, a book, piece of art, even an experience? And I know you've touched on a few already, but any kind of like artistic artifact or something like that that changed the way that you thought about your work, or changed your creative process or practice, or even changed your life?
There's a piano piece called Reservoir by Donica Dennehy. I mean, that piece, when I heard it for the first time, like, I cried. I was like, "This person understands me on some deep intellectual level that I don't understand myself." It was like, I don't know, man, it's hard to talk about that piece. Um, just, the way the chords work and the feeling of it and the intensity of it and the drive. I'm just like, man. I mean, what I love about music is like, I'm 45 years old, and I know, like, maybe tomorrow I'm gonna hear a new piece of music to knock me on my. You know what I mean? There's just so much great music out there. Yeah, that guy's a genius. I actually don't want to meet him. Like, I came close. I went to the So Percussion. So Percussion had like a thing I sat in for a day. Because I wanted to
Yeah.
see if my students would like it, and he was there. I totally avoided him. I was like, I don't want to meet him. You know.
Why do you think, is it like don't meet your heroes kind of a thing,
I
or?
think it's kind of like that. Like, a lot of professors are like really not that nice, and I don't want to have a negative experience with someone I admire that much.
Yeah. For what it's worth, I've heard he is a very nice guy. So
I'm sure he is. I mean, it is weird. Like, most of the professors that I've met have been wonderful,
yeah.
right? Like, I love them. really inspiring. I feel so grateful to study for them. All those things are there. And then you just hear horror stories of other people. And then, you just try to think nice things.
Yeah, I understand.
I am stuck in this weird place where I feel like I love all these composers so much, these new music composers, and I am not cool enough for them at all. So I just admire them from here, where they can't like say mean things to me.
Yeah, I kind of feel that. You mentioned kind of like exclusivity earlier, and I think the contemporary music field is putting in a lot of effort to be as inclusive as possible. But there is, I kind of share the sentiment that you just mentioned a little bit. Like I feel like, yeah, maybe I'm just not as cool as some people, so like people don't find my music as much, or stuff like that. And I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's just I need to shift my framework for that a little bit, or certainly, people who make really great music, they get a lot of opportunities, and people who make really great music sometimes don't. So
I mean, I think one of my feelings is that every industry winds up where, the number of the opportunities only go to a very small percentage of them, but that small percentage is all of them. And I mean, right now, like I'm a beneficiary of it. Like I'm getting a lot of gigs working as orchestra concerts for video games,
sure.
so I can't complain about the thing I'm a beneficiary of in that sense. But it would be nicer to have more players in the game, or where more people felt like they were in the game. I think you deserve to be in the game. Your music's fantastic.
Well, I appreciate that. So this whole conversation so far, we've been talking a lot about, I think, like, your independence as a music maker throughout your career, and that's why I asked you to be on the show, because I mean that's how I feel like a very independent spirit myself as I move through this world and move through this field as a music maker myself. And so, what do you feel is the importance of doing things on your own in your own unique way, whether that is specifically for yourself, what is the importance to you personally, but also, for others who may be listening, who may need to think more outside the box in the way they do things.
I never expected anyone to like my music. So as a starting point, right, like having 10 fans is like way more than I thought I was gonna have. But if you have a song in your heart and you have to express it, like you need to express it. You shouldn't there's no reason why you shouldn't. You get one opportunity in this world to be yourself, and I think you have no choice but to be yourself.
Yeah.
And if you're not doing things because you're worried about I mean, this happened all the time with students. It was like they were worried that they weren't writing enough classical music or enough classical style music, and then I'd always be like, "I'm here to make the music you wanna make. Like, your job is not to make the music that I prefer. Your job is to make the music you prefer?" And I think that it's just so important. Some people they're gonna be tapped to the zeitgeist, and they're going to make these huge pop records, and that's the way they express themselves. They're in that world, and they're able to succeed at it. But part of it is because they have the conviction to be in that world. Like Taylor Swift believes in Taylor Swift more than anybody else in the country, you know? And I'm not gonna ever put her down for writing awesome music that inspires like billions of people,
Yeah.
you know? There's an audience out there for everybody. And if you make your music with conviction, the music you want to make, and you have the gumption to go out there and really promote yourself and try and do these kind of marketing and emails and rejection, 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 rejection. You will find that audience and you will find a degree of success, and you should try to be satisfied with that degree of success if you find it.
So, getting into my final set of questions here, and these are questions I ask everybody. What do you think you would be doing if it wasn't your art, if it wasn't music, if it's something totally different?
I'd be resting in peace, my friend. I might have made very different choices, all which have been bad. Because the song "Heroin" by the Velvet Underground
Yeah.
is so great. Like, it's such a great song. If I was a teenager and I heard that and I was really into it, I would probably have tried heroin. Like, it's a great example. You know what
Okay,
I
I
mean?
see. Yeah.
But like my example is Frank Zappa writes a book, and everyone who even snorts a line of coke immediately sprouts a permanent clown nose. And so I'm sitting there, my biggest hero is like, don't do drugs, don't do drugs. Like, I'm not going to do them. I'm not going to be a person who Frank thinks is a jerk, you know? So that's kind of an example. I think that, you know, Frank would disagree with me vehemently about this topic, actually, about like the kind of media you ingest and how it kind of can affect you. You know what I mean? But I think if you're listening to like a lot of really good drug songs and experimenting with drugs, like you're gonna get like a bad result, you know. But that bad result's gonna come from the influence of the things around you, not so much like your desire to do drugs. I mean, I can't imagine a world in which I want to do heroin because that's ridiculous. But I think you get onto my point, kind of. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get it.
You know, I was trained. You know, Frank said, you know, chemical alteration does not make for precision performance. And I read those words when I was 15. I was, you know what I mean? Like, no, man, you're getting good by practicing. Like, it was the discipline part that I wasn't getting in my outside world. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Is there a tool that you use in your practice that you think everyone should know about and that everyone else could benefit from?
You know, the steps to Parnassus are really awesome. I think people, the criticism of studying counterpoint, of course, is that I'm recreating the music of the 18th century or earlier, you know,
Yeah.
or later, but you get the point here. But the goal of steps to Parnassus is not learning how to write like J.S. Bach. It's understanding that you can balance forces, right? So counterpoint exercises should be musical when you complete them. They should feel musical to you because you are creating a aesthetic, right? But there is benefit to the discipline of following those rules because they teach you to understand how the things work.
Mm,
And then you can thwart them or subvert them or, you know, deform them, as Hepikowski and Darcy would say. But I do think the ultimate goal of counterpoint is not writing like J.S. Bach, is understanding I can have these forces and balance them and have multiple lines happening simultaneously and how they relate to one another and, you know, how to make something that's more interesting than its consequent parts. Those are lessons that I think are good for everybody in terms of music creation. And, you know, producers do it. Like, they don't know they're doing it, but like dance music producers or hip hop guys, like they're doing the same thing if they're not aware of it, you know?
yeah, for sure. I never thought about that. Like, because I do a decent amount of production work, obviously. It is like counterpoint sometimes. A lot of times.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Well, voices have cadences too. They have natural cadences and rhythms and stuff. And, you know, that's how I write vocal music is I try to pretend like I'm an actor. And then, because one of the worst things, you go to a music concert and you can't understand what the person's saying or what they're singing. And the way to solve that is you just perform it for yourself, then write down the rhythms. I'm not a didactic way, but it's a starting point. I'm a huge believer in editing. Like, I'm a monster editor. I'm ruthless and merciless in my editing. And that takes up most of my creative process when I write music is the editing process, not the creation process.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to start from a place where you can make a coherent object, you know. And before you committed to a certain, you know, as a composer, you understand, like you get a certain pattern, you're like, this is the pattern, this is the thing. Well, it would be great if that pattern could be a coherent vocal pattern for someone to sing before you get stuck on the pattern, you know?
Right. Exactly. So my final question is, what is something that you've never had a chance to say about your art that you've always wanted to share with people?
Everybody who has helped me and supported my music and, you know, paid for concert tickets or bought albums or streamed albums or taught my music, or I think of all of them as my friends. And one thing I deeply admire about Yoko Ono is that when she says she loves you, I believe it like individually and collectively. Like,
Yeah.
Yoko Ono is a stranger to me, but I believe that she loves me as a group of people that she loves.
Yeah.
And when David Lynch says that he's your friend in the same sense, I believe that David Lynch is my friend. I mean, not in a literal sense, you know what I mean? But I feel like I'm part of the community of his art making. And I want people to feel like that they could be a part of my community of art making and that they'll be welcome here and valued.
Yeah. I love that. Chris, this was so much fun, and we're gonna have to do it again sometime
I was
because
so happy you had fun.
it's
I was nervous.
awesome. Yeah. But seriously, thank you so much for hanging out with me today and sharing a bit of your journey with us.
Anytime, I really admire the. Ever since I met you, I've always admired the work that you've done, and I think you've done so much in the new music community, and you've done so much to bring this music to so many people. I just really think that's great. I really admire you deeply.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So much cool stuff to consider in that conversation with Chris, and I truly just love hearing how he has gone about navigating his career in the music industry and in the world of contemporary music. Chris's music is so diverse and varied, and more importantly, just really, really good. And I hope you'll check it all out on his website. That's chrisopperman.net, and I'll have a link to that in the show notes for this episode. I'm Tyler Kline, and thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Music Maker. Music Maker with Tyler Kline is a production of Loose Leaf Transmissions, made for all ears. We are online at looseleaftransmissions.com, where you can find more episodes of this podcast, as well as ways to support the podcast and network. All right, that'll do it for my time here with you today. Thanks again for listening, and I will see you here next time for the next edition of Music Maker.